I'm going to try something new. I sometimes lose my place because of the music and things that are on there. I want to first remind the people who are present who may not know how our church got its name. I think I've shared it with you briefly in the past, but first of all, let me give you the chronological context. It was while we were in the midst of our ministry to HIV. It was when we were in the midst of trying to understand what exactly was going on and to recognize that literally the hope of many people was being destroyed by what was being said out there. Kurt and I had traveled to some church growth conferences, and one of the things that we learned in the church growth conference was that your name should always reflect in some way what you wish to accomplish as a church. We wanted to accomplish restoring hope to those who had been HIV infected. We wanted to establish hope for people who were being told that it was a curse from God and thereby frozen with fear. We wanted to restore hope to people who internalized and had self-hatred and doubt about whether or not God loved them. We wanted to establish hope for people, mothers, fathers, friends, and loved ones who weren't gay, but loved someone deeply who was gay. And we wanted to proclaim to them, as many of you are, that they were not wrong, that there was hope. We wanted to establish this in a way that was going to be understood, that this church wanted to accomplish that. And so we became Spirit of Hope. But the truth of the matter is that you cannot give what you do not have. So if it is our desire to establish and to restore hope to those people that I have mentioned to you, then it was important for us to begin to really build up a sense of hope within ourselves. For some, that might come easy. For others, it might take a little bit of work. And for others, they might feel that it's just impossible because embedded in them so deeply and so far is buying into all of the negative things that we have heard about who we are and what we are. The fact is, you cannot give what you do not have. The scripture referred, King David in the scripture referred to foreigners, strangers, people who dwelled in the shadows. And that God was looking at those people. And David told us in that monologue that God saw that those people who felt like foreigners, felt like strangers, felt like they had to dwell in the shadows, were people without hope. And that rang a bell for me, because isn't that where we were at? Don't we oftentimes, when we first started thinking about who we were and what our self-definition was, that we were estranged from our Baptist roots, our Catholic roots, our Nazarene roots, our fundamentalist roots, whatever roots we may have had? Don't we buy into the fact that we are looked upon by others as strange? Don't we buy into the fact that sometimes we are forced, because of society, to dwell in the shadows? And so we are those people, and those are the people that we are called to give hope to. So before we can give them hope, we have to be assured of it ourselves. And sometimes that is not an easy task. Hope involves two things: faith and love. The first thing that we have to do is have faith that, according to what we read in the scriptures, that Christ died for us and rose for us. That when Christ was teaching, he wasn't just teaching to the righteous. He was teaching to all of us. We need to have faith that grace is powerful in our lives, and that we are the recipients of grace. And we are the recipients of it, and sometimes we don't even know what in the name of God it is. And yet we are recipients of it. And it comes to us sometimes in formats and in forms and in people and in situations that we never even recognized. And yet it was and is and will continue to be the grace of God extending to us, unworthy though we may think we are, estranged, foreign, still dwelling in the shadows. The grace of God is there for us. Remember, doubt does not destroy faith. I want to tell you, I've been preaching here now during my second reign. 2 years in May. Time flies when you're having fun. 2 years. And during those 2 years, I would be lying if I did not tell you that I have had doubt after doubt after doubt about my own faith. And yet I do not hesitate to come up here every Sunday and to preach to you about God. Because no matter what I'm going through, no matter what changes I'm experiencing, no matter what is powerfully distracting me in my life, and there has been a lot, God does not change. God's love is not greater for me when I suffer. God's love is not greater for me when times are terrific. God's love is not greater for me based on anything that I am experiencing as a real, live, flesh and blood human being, because God's love is ever conditional, regardless of my doubt, regardless of my fear, regardless of anything I may be going through or even saying in anger. God, as the scripture said, died so that sinners, as well as the righteous, might have a way of rising above it all and of conquering death. So faith, you've got to develop it if you want to have hope. The second thing that you and I have to have is love. Love for God, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, how to do it. Love for others that we talk about all the time, but sometimes I think we talk about it so frequently that it loses its impact. We don't see it. It's like that little bit of laundry in the corner of our room. We leave it there long enough, after a while we don't notice it. And then all of a sudden we have an idea that somebody's coming by and they may come in the room. I better get rid of it. I better do it. Or we run out of socks or whatever. Something spurs us on to get rid of it. And sometimes that happens with us. We talk about God loving us so often, and we talk about loving others so often, that we sometimes lose track of the power, the joy, and the result of practicing that love in our day-to-day life. As far as loving ourselves is concerned, that's probably the thing that we're the worst at. Some of us don't take care of ourselves. Some of us are so busy trying to love someone else that we don't recognize that there is someone behind us trying to extend love to us, but we don't see them because we're preoccupied with our own agenda, and we are so involved in trying to do something good for someone else that we don't recognize what's happening for us. And yet we have to rise above that. Christ died for all of us, even as imperfect as you are and as I am. Christ died that we might have life and have it more abundantly. Unfortunately, or fortunately, when we say Christ died for us, that too is something in a Christian church which sometimes doesn't have the impact that it ought to have, because we hear about it so often. I want to tell you that loving others, loving yourself, and loving God also demands a sacrifice. Sometimes a sacrifice of your time, and so many of you here are so wonderful about that. A sacrifice of your money. You support this church, and you've supported it through some really rough times, but hey, here we are. Here we are. And it's because of the sacrifices that you have made that we are still here, still striving to find a way to imbue in others a spirit of hope. Amen. What a powerful witness to perseverance, which builds character, and character builds hope. Okay, we're in that character building phase right now as a church. God knows I want to get out of it. But we're in that phase. The result is going to be the hope. The hope that God calls us to. The hope that we reap as a harvest in such abundance that there is not a hesitancy on the part of anyone here to share that hope with someone else. That's why we exist. Okay, that's the introduction to my sermon. Let's look at Paul for a moment. As exemplified in the book of Acts, let there be no hypocrisy when we speak about our faith. He told the truth the way it was. He admitted some of the things that he did wrong. He enlightened them about some of the things that were and were not true about the accusations. And then he basically said, let the chips fall where they may. Paul died for the strength of his beliefs. And we as people need to admit our imperfections. I know that some of you, when you find yourselves in a social situation apart from the church, are very reluctant to bring up matters of faith. Learn from what Paul did. You don't have to be all gooey and oozy and pressure people. You simply say, yes, I go to church. And I really believe that I have hope in my life because of it. Someday, if you're ever so inclined, come with me. That's it. Then drop it. You don't have to all of a sudden say, I don't mind if I'm beheaded. I don't mind if I drive this person away. I want them to know. I want them to know just how strong my faith is. And we wind up as a spiritual type of narcissist. When I was in the monastery, one of the things that really used to bother me, God forgive me, even now. One of the things that really used to bother me, we had this one brother, I won't say his last name, but his first name was Richard. And Brother Richard used to walk around like this all day. I swear I wanted to smack him with the Bible. What were you trying to prove? And then we had this other brother, Brother Timothy, who was the exact opposite. Timothy always had a smile on his face. He always had a good word. He always was able to respond to even a difficult situation in such a way that people would all of a sudden give it a second thought, instead of becoming negative about it, really beginning to understand the fullness of what it means to love and to forgive and to be forgiven. Timothy later left the monastery and became a Catholic priest, and in fact was on staff at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. Timothy had a beautiful singing voice. Richard eventually left as well. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what happened to him. I pray for him. I hope good things happen to him. It made me, however, looking at it, want to choose. It made my conscience say, do I want people to just think I'm holy? Or do I want to be holy? That's a choice that all of us, as members of this church, as friends of this church, as people who are not even sure yet that you're committed to this church, that is something that all of us should do in our spiritual lives. Not everybody is called to be a member here. But by God, when they come here, we should give them hope too, for whatever their spiritual walk may be. It's our job. There are no prerequisites. They don't have to come up here and get a certificate. It is our job for anybody who walks through those doors. Our friends, our loved ones, gay, straight, black, white. It does not matter. That's our job. Love of God, of others, and of self. How can we become hopeful so that we can give that hope away? That's what I've been talking about for this entire series. And the first sermon was on what? How do we love God? How do we know that we love God? In order to become hopeful, you have to know God, and God has to know you. So you need to court God, and you need to get to know one another in prayer. That's step number one to become hopeful. Step number two, if you remember, was to work with a gentleness in everything that we do. To make that gentleness be the way people understand. And remember, I said very definitely, gentleness is not wimpiness. Paul was gentle in his response to Felix and to the Jews who were accusing him, but he did not back down. We need to be gentle with ourselves as well. Quit beating yourself up for something that you did. God forgave you and forgot it a long time ago. Do you have a right to hold on to it more than God would have? Get over it. Get over it. Sometimes we think that the whole world and all of spirituality depends on how holy we are. It does not. It depended upon how holy Christ was. And Christ's sacrifice for us and Christ's rising for us, and Christ's teaching for us. Be gentle with other people. Be gentle with yourself. And last week we talked about respecting sacred places. The sacred places of the hearts and the minds of others who touch your life. The sacred place of this sanctuary as a temple of God. And a recognition that you and that those you know, whether they be holy or not, are also temples of God. A revelation. And this week, lastly, I am charging all of us with the necessity to address and to cultivate hope wherever we see despair. In the heart of another, in yourself. Because there is no despair in God. There's only lasting opportunities to be a son or a daughter and an heir to the promises. On a spiritual plane, do it by prayer. On a human plane, do it by behavior. What you say, what you do. Read some of the scriptures on curbing the tongue. Read the reality of what we can destroy in a person's life and how we can add to despair simply by something that we've said or how we've treated them. You can recognize when you have anger, but Scripture says, be angry but sin not. I fluctuated over these periods of time between sadness and anger. And I'm careful to never let the anger take anchor. Am I always successful? Sometimes more than others. But that's when I go to my God and ask for more grace. And that's the last way. Rely on God's grace, working in you, growing in you, and moving you to the next place that you and I need to be in our lives. God bless you today. May you have a spirit of hope in such abundance that you share it with others. Amen.